Welcome to the Godot community for Visual Arts High School 3D. Our topic is sparking creativity in our students. I think when creativity hits a wall or when it never gets moving in the first place, providing students with activities designed for experimentation and exploration can encourage abstract thinking and that creative problem solving that I think comes from our students and that we love to see in our classroom. I think especially with an activity like this, where it's relatively risk-free and really frees the students up to explore and express themselves in a low-risk situation. They're not, concerned about the expense of the materials. It's not a super time-consuming activity. I think it's just a really great starting point for an entry-level sculpture class. As 3D teachers, we're tasked with teaching a subject that students have the least amount of experience with. We know that they've been drawing and mark making and painting from a very early age. And a lot of times, really outside of maybe some Play Doh, our students have very little experience with 3D processes. When I did my student teaching, I had this grand plan that my Sculpture 1 students were going to make tessellated slip cast tiles. So, new material, new process, new concept, new technique, new teacher. When it was all said and done, the amount of maintenance and hand holding and just the day to day processes of this project were, I mean, just exhausting. And of course, I had some success with it. However, I remember when it was all over, a teachable moment, my cooperating teacher said something that has stuck with me, and that is that it's difficult for students to learn new concepts, new materials, new processes, new techniques, all within a single lesson. And so I think when students enter our classroom, it's natural that they don't have a bunch of ideas for 3D form right out of the gate, simply because they have so little experience. And I think that sculpture can be really intimidating. So it's understandable that our students sometimes hit a creative wall. That's why activities like the one I'll be discussing are so valuable. I learned about this activity when I attended a Godot AP workshop at SCAD a few years ago, and I've been using it ever since. It's been a really great tool for my students as a jumping off point and has often led to larger sculptural works. It's a great starting point for abstract and non-representational work that I think students often struggle with. As an artist, I often think, why would you want to confine yourself to making things that are only realistic? Because you're really, held to a standard of what something should look like. But students really struggle with making work that does not replicate an actual object. So I think it's a good way to break through that wall as well. Start the activity by showing students the Art 21 video where Richard Serra discusses his process. Please take a moment to watch the video before moving on by accessing the link on this slide.
When I first started, what was very, very important to me was dealing with the nature of process. So what I had done is I'd written a verb list: to roll, to fold, to cut, to dangle, to twist, or whatever. And I really just worked out pieces in relation to the verb list physically in a space. Now, what happens when you do that is you don't become involved with the psychology of what you're making, nor do you become involved with the afterimage of what's going to look like. So basically, it gives you a way of proceeding with material in relation to body movement, in relation to making, that divorces you from any notion of metaphor, any notion of easy imagery. I think what artists do is they invent strategies that allow themselves to see in a way that they haven't seen before to extend their vision. Various artists do it in different ways. Cezanne did it his way. Obviously, Pollock did it his way by dripping downward in a horizontal plane. But I think what's interesting about artists is they constantly come up with ways of informing themselves by inventing tools or techniques or processes that allow them to see into a material manifestation in the way that you would not if you dealt with standardized or academic ways of thinking. These ellipses only came about because we invented a wheel to make these things in order for us to understand what we were doing. And albeit it's a small invention, and on another sense, it has never come up in the history of form making before. We're not drawing the outside of the piece like a pear or a donut. What we're doing is trying to figure out what the internal volume will revolve like. We made a wheel to figure that out, and that wheel predicates the outside the skin. So it's the way of working from the inside out. But I think one constantly tries to invent ways of seeing into what one's doing so you don't get into some lockstep notion of how to do what you do. I have to kind of invent new strategies in order not to go back to something that's just a reflex action.
After viewing the video, you can supply students with whatever materials you want. I usually start by having them write their own list of verbs, but you certainly could supply a list for them. If they're writing their own, which I think is better, maybe have them really start thinking about words um, that conjure up action, maybe words that aren't used so frequently. Of their word list, have them select 5, and then using paper, have them tear, curl, fold, cut, crumple, rip, manipulate, alter, whatever they need to do to the paper to express the action of each word. I've used just regular copy paper for this. I have used index cards. It's really what you have available or what you want to give your students. I usually do not give them adhesives, but again, that's really up to what you want to do. Typically, I will just supply them with paper and a pair of scissors. Some considerations that students might want to think about is, are you making something that is in the round? Are you making something that is a wall relief? Do you want to divide up a piece of paper and make multiple forms that show a progression somehow? When students are working with this paper, I think the possibilities of the effects of different ways of manipulating paper are really broad. So students are really able to communicate a lot with just something very simple. In our next session, we are going to talk about analyzing the results and using it as a springboard for photographing work or as beginning thought or ideation for larger works. As always, thank you, and I hope the information that I have provided today is something that you can use in your classroom.